Oh, thank you all for coming. So some of you I've spoken to already. I'm Nicky. I work at a company called FutureLearn, an online social learning platform. I'm currently a technical manager there, but before I did that job, I was a web developer for a long, long time, like decades. And I'm definitely on the developer end of the kind of designer-developer spectrum. I'm not very good at design. I have a lovely deck from my company, which is why you all are not going to be shuddering in horror at the slides. So I can't do these things on my own. I have to work with designers to ship the products that we build together. So I've got a real interest, and I've developed this interest over the years of like making sure that developers and designers can kind of work a bit closer together and communicate a bit better. And hopefully this talk is about some cool ways that you can take away and do this. So I want to talk about developers and designers who want to kind of push their imaginations to the limit, push the web to the limit. And I'm going to talk about why some of the things that we've been doing over the past few years are not so perfect anymore, and we can kind of move a bit beyond that. There's a way to move on. So this is what we're going to cover. I realize this is kind of a bold statement. Web design is getting boring. Hashtag not all websites. Sorry. The Ember London website is lovely, by the way. Very good. Well done. Some practical sort of takeaways, and some final sort of things that I stumbled on while I was doing some of this work that you might want to look out for. So why are grids so great anyway? They work really well for lots of reasons. We've all been using them and building them over years, decades, some of us, from tables to floats to Flexbox and CSS Grid now. And for many, many more years offline. So why do we do it? Well, to answer that question, we need to go way back. This is the pyramid texts, and it's from 2300 BC, so like several thousand years old. This kind of blows my mind that we can even see something like this that is that old, and this kind of the first example of human writing that we have, people trying to kind of communicate with each other. But I would like you to note that I think this is a one-column layout, right? It's slightly weird because it's like top to bottom, but it's all one column. So a little bit later, 568 AD, beautiful, it's like stunning again, and this also blows my mind that we have access to this kind of early example of human communication. This is the Birmingham Quran manuscript. And again, you can see like it's 2 pages, but it's all still one column. So finally, 808 AD, 3,000 years, I think, maybe more, after chipping away at that stone, we finally get to a 2-column layout. So this is the sort of marginalia, the text that people would write in the side column that was left empty of the book that was printed. And finally, you can start to see the benefit of a grid layout because this is sort of supporting information and related concepts that can be sort of attached to pieces of the text. In the early 20th century, the grid movement, the art sort of movement exploded, and the grid system was finally kind of named. I don't think it really had a name before this. And it starts to look a lot more similar to the kind of component systems that we're all used to using much more today. Massimo Vignelli designed the Unigrid in, I think, the 1970s for that exact reason, to kind of make the work more modular, make it more reusable. It would have consistency. It would be a lot easier to create. And this still helps the national park cartographers today who use this system. They use the Unigrid to make the layouts more readable. And the other thing I really like about these is that they look really good. Apart from having a kind of aesthetic benefit there, it helps balance the pages so that one element is not overpowering the other, and it keeps things more balanced. It also has a practical benefit because it helps people sort of stay a bit more engaged with the content and read it a bit more and stay safe and enjoy the park. That is the reason they're there. But there are some really bad examples of using grid as well. Like this. Which one of the 2 possible websites? And this tweet is from 2 years ago. And I got to be honest, I don't see a huge amount of change. This is super snarky, I know, but you can take it a little bit too far. I'm not knocking it. Like, the reason we do this kind of stuff is because it works on a lot of levels, right? It's easy to do, it's easy to reproduce, it's modular. If you use the Unigrid, it makes everything really easy to look really good, be more useful. But it's really boring. You look at this and you can sort of see the clues in the name. It's called the Css Box Model. It makes boxes. You can have the margin on the inside or the outside, but they're all kind of the same shape. Design is this discipline with this really rich history, and it would be a shame if we didn't make more use of it. And things like this are a problem. So it's really good that like Squarespace is available so that people can have really good communication and really good tools and make it easier for so many more people to do stuff. But again, I think we're missing something if it's like it's all coming out looking the same. The benefits of that rich history of thought from those sort of people chipping away on that stone have been lost. And you run the risk of not getting your message across as effectively as you could. So like the only reason I'm even giving this talk, like the spark of the idea of it, was through conversations with designers at work and with friends. And they say, hey, we've got this box, Nicky, like what can you do to make it look more interesting and make it stand out? And for the last 10 years, all I've been able to say is, oh, I could put some rounded corners on it, like, you know. It's not very satisfying for me or for them. And the only reason we even have the ability to do this kind of stuff in CSS is because designers got frustrated with like the Netscape mosaic text layout, and they want fonts, and they want colors, and they want to make stuff more interesting and get their message across more effectively. So let's think a bit bigger. It doesn't have to be just rounded corners. And I'm not the only one thinking this. This is Jen Simmons. She's a designer and developer advocate at Mozilla, and she's really pushing this idea that there are graphic design tools and graphic design thought that we can bring to the web and make things so much more interesting than they currently are right now. This was a list apart sort of webinar. I hate that word, but I think that's what it was. I watched it, so you don't have to. We're copying each other's work too much. Too many things look like Medium. Too many things look like web design out of 2007. Everybody's bored. So this way, there is a way to make design better on the web. And once I started thinking about this, I could see it everywhere. I found all these examples of graphic design, this is like print design, really interesting, really striking art direction, really kind of engages you with the content and makes you want to read it and carry on with it more. These were all from one issue of the Evening Standard. Somebody there really likes this kind of style. And the point of all these examples is like, we can do this stuff in print. And I think for a long time we've had this kind of separation of print and web, and we don't want to be too much like the other. But actually there are things that we can learn from it, and there are things that we can draw together. So if we did want to do stuff like this, and we didn't have CSS shapes, how would we do it? How have we done it in the past? Super old school, just chuck it all in an image. It's not very accessible, it's not very scalable, it's not very responsive. I think a lot of webcomics are still made like this, which I think is a real shame, because that's a sort of design and discipline that would be open to a lot more people. If you didn't want to put everything just in an image, you could do it with JavaScript and kind of like put everything in its own element and, you know, position everything manually. Not very scalable, performant. There's probably other ways that you can think of that aren't great too. So that's kind of the current state of the art. So let's get away from these boring rectangles. We're stuck in our old ways. We can do something a bit more interesting. Once you understand the rules and you understand why grids exist and that they make things look really good and you can do the white balance and all of that stuff, like we've got the tools to kind of break out of it now. So let's use this one neat trick. CSS shapes. That was the history. Now we're looking forward. So the first thing I want to talk to you about is shape outside. It has these values. Hopefully this is like sensibly named, but shape outside applied to an element makes the text flow around the element in the shape that you've chosen. We're just going to be covering the top 3 values today because as far as I can tell, inset doesn't do anything that floats can't do. And an ellipse, my designer friends at work tell me this is not true, but I think it's the same as a circle. So shape outside circle, I got to warn you, these are very Ronseal properties. They sort of do what they say on the tin. This aligns text around a circle. And this is so easy to do. This is what I kind of get quite frustrated about when I don't understand why people don't do it more often. This is a really simple example. Just a circle with a red dot layout. You could do that however you wanted. I've used as the border radius. And if you add this one line, you get this nice sort of curving text flow. It's the only thing you need to add. If you don't have shape outside support, then you just get your standard fallback that you would have had anyway. So like one-liner, why not, right? Next up, polygons. So the simplest example of a polygon is a triangle. This is what that might look like. It's a really simple example. I've done it with borders. And again, it's just this one-liner. So the dot, dot, dot there indicates that, OK, it's getting like slightly more complicated now. You actually have to set the points that you want to use. You can do that in pixels, percentage, rems, whatever you like. But it's getting a little bit more complicated, and you have to sort of think about what you're doing. Just as with the circle, if shape outside is not supported, you just get your standard rectangle that people in the olden days would have got. This is another example of a polygon. This is just a square rectangle with the corner cut off. This is what it looks like. And again, you can see you have to kind of go in and set these points. So it's starting to look a little bit more complicated again. It's like, this is a bit more work. Like, how do I keep these numbers straight in my head? Where do they start from? You know, and it gets worse, right? Polygons can have infinite points, I guess. This is really cool. I love this layout. But that declaration is starting to look a bit horrendous, and it goes on for like pages down here. So this is starting to look like, it looks good, but it's a bit of a pain in the arse. It's a bit of a barrier to entry, and if I have to do all this work, then I might not bother. I might not think it's worth it. So we're very lucky that we have a bunch of people like Jen Simmons who have been doing a whole bunch of good work, and her team, to make this kind of stuff a lot easier for us. So the first thing I want to show you, I think this will work. This is the video. So this is Firefox Nightly, and it's a video of their new shape editor. So I've downloaded the browser, I've got my DevTools open, and I'm going to just inspect the element that has the shape applied. Usually people can't see this because it's so tiny, but there's a tiny little icon down here, and if you click on it in the rule editor, then you get these points. Like, this blew my mind again. Like, watch what happens. You can drag them around. This is like, look, Mom, I'm a designer. This is so cool. This is absolutely amazing. And the other thing I really like about this is the values are changing here. So you can just copy and paste them in. Like, you can sit with your designer and like they can do it. You know, amazing. You'd have to do less work, which is always a good thing. And these tools as well, I think, just landed in Firefox 62 like this week. So I don't know when it's coming out, but it's there. So yeah, this was really amazing. I was very pleased when I heard out about this. And it's not just shapes as well that you can edit in here. There's a whole bunch of other stuff like grid and various other editors. So right now you have to download Firefox Nightly to get that. If you don't want to do that, it's too much work. I'm trying to make this like as less effort as possible for you. You can get this extension for Chrome, and it works in kind of pretty much the same way. So that's everything about polygons. And even with these tools, you might find that this is like still a bit of extra work that you don't want to do, or maybe your designer is busy and you can't find the time to kind of sit down together and sort of play with things, you know, on a pixel by pixel basis. So there's one last value for shape outside that I want to talk to you about, which is, again, this just completely blew my mind when I found out about it. So we're going to have the same sort of art direction and the same sort of effect. We're going to curve this text around like a weird shape, but we're not going to do this with like very little code at all. I think this is actually magic as far as, that's actually magic as far as I can tell. It uses the alpha channel of the image. How cool is that? Yeah, it's incredibly clever. So it needs a transparent PNG, obviously, or an SVG. So the new sort of value there is this image, like URL to your image, and the shape image threshold, which, I want to get this right, so 0.5 there means all the pixels that are more than 50% transparent will be sort of attacked by this shape vector. And the reason I was so excited to come across this is that I think this is a much more valuable use case than like drawing lines and shapes and what have you. The likelihood is that you're going to be aligning text around an image, and the likelihood is that if you have to do that, then your designer has already done the work. They've opened up the image and they've prepared it and they've made it look really good. So you may as well just kind of let the browser do the work for you in that case. So that's all I have to share about CSS shapes. Let's have a look at, well, my next thought was browser support. Like, how real is this? How can I use it? Somebody's already asked me today, did I check this in IE 11? Like, yes, I did, and I'm going to tell you exactly how to deal with it. So this is can I use for CSS shapes. So Firefox is kind of just poking its nose in there. Opera Mini, I don't know what they're doing. They never have anything. It's never going to be in IE 11, sorry, but we'll deal with that later. It's just coming into Firefox. It's under consideration in Edge. I don't really know what that means. Does anyone know what that means? It means they might or they might not, depending on, yeah. But you can see, like, this stuff has actually been around for a long, long time. And I'm really interested in, like, why people aren't using it very much if it's been around for so long. Yeah. So I say we have to be somewhat careful when we're using it with older browsers, but the nice thing about it is that it has this kind of natural fallback. Like, this is what people are used to. This is what people see all over the web every day. If that's all they see, then no biggie, right? If they have the support, they will get the nice circle or the nice alignments. So that's CSS Shapes. CSS Shapes has a kind of natural companion in this sort of work. If you're like doing art direction or doing graphic design on the web, then this is another thing that you might use in combination with it. Hopefully, maybe some of you have seen how paths work in like image software. You know, you draw a shape and then some of it's visible and some of it's not. Let's look at some examples. The nice thing I liked about this was that the syntax and the sort of shapes for it are all exactly the same. So if you learn it once, you can kind of use it anywhere. They all work in exactly the same sorts of ways. These are called, confusingly, basic shapes. This list of things, and so I guess like as they introduce like more stuff, then the browser will just use the same thing, which is quite easy. So then you can start doing this kind of thing. Again, quite an exciting example. I did this with the browser tools. I just kind of dragged it around for this example. Worth noting at this point, you can use this on images, as I've done here, but you can also use it on other elements as well, any HTML element and also SVG elements. So this is, again, really exciting. Like I showed this to designer friends, and they were like, what? You can do this in the browser? Amazing. And the reason they were so excited and I was so excited about it is because I don't know if anyone's ever tried to do stuff like this in a sort of slightly, complex layout or interestingly, like visually interesting layout. But it ended up being a lot of back and forth with me and the designer. Like they would give me an image and I would upload it, and then I would show them, and then they would say, oh, that's not quite right. And then they would have to go and make an image again, and then I would upload it, and then I would show them, and hopefully that would be okay. And if it wasn't, then we kind of repeated this process a lot. But this way, I can just put them in front of a browser and let them do it. Brilliant. So this is a real-world example. This is the website that I work for, futurelearn.com. And we used ClipPath to do this kind of shape, like blocky outline in the middle of this new homepage module that we had, which no one can ever see on the slides because we've used a really weird version of gray that doesn't show up. But there's supposed to be blocks down here. This is how it looks on mobile. So again, like with CSS Shapes, you can use any unit, you can make it responsive. I think we use calc as well in this case, so that we had like quite fine-grained control over it. And it's pretty much another one-liner. We wanted this kind of quite complicated shape, so we did have to sort of sit and work it out. The team did some mock-ups in CodePen to sort of prove the concept, and then they sat down together and they just did it, and here we are. Because they did the shape here, we didn't have to go back and forth with those images. And we were happy with this fallback. So if we don't have ClipPath support, we just get the straight line. Yeah, fine. Like for a one-liner, I don't think there's a huge overhead in sending one extra line of CSS. It probably depends how much other CSS you're sending as well. But our design team and we were quite happy with this sort of extra flair that we could add to the site. So that's ClipPath on HTML elements. Where it gets really exciting and interesting, I think, is on SVG elements. Because SVG elements, one of the good things about them is that they can have text nodes inside. So you can start doing crazy stuff like this, which normally we would have had to use images for. And if we're using SVG, we can also have multiple shapes inside. This is a lot easier to do with ClipPath than it is with shapes. You'd have a lot of stuff going on there if you were trying to do that with CSS Shapes. I think that if you're trying to do something like this as well, it's much more performant because you can just have like the one image. Maybe you could do spriting with like different shapes coming out of a different area or something like that. So again, let's look at browser support. This is the HTML version. Can I use tells us that support for ClipPath and SVG is supported in all browsers with basic SVG support. That's not strictly true. There's a few little bugs and issues that we would come to later. It's not quite as well supported as CSS Shapes, so yeah, these are the sorts of things that you'll have in your mind when you're like considering whether to use one or the other. So that's it for practical tips. The last thing I wanted to sort of share with you is to come back to this idea of like, this stuff has been around for a long time, like years. Why are we not using it? And I think the answer to that is that we've got into this kind of all or nothing mentality. We think that if something's not supported in the browsers that our team, say like 97% of browsers, or the browser support kind of matrix that we've laid out for ourselves, it means that we can't use it. And I don't think that's true. It just means we need to be a tiny bit cleverer about the way that we think things through and how we design and how we build stuff. And there are some good tools that can help us with this as well. So this is the situation we found ourselves in at FutureLearn with the module. These are very simple examples, and they were very simple examples on purpose so that we could kind of learn about this stuff over the last half an hour together. We wanted to do something like slightly more complicated. So I showed this example earlier, but this example is a little bit simplified when I showed you on purpose, again, because I wanted to show a simple example so that we could see how it all works. But actually, there's a little bit more going on here. When we don't have clip path support, it's not entirely symmetrical. You'll probably not be surprised how much that annoys people. This is very annoying. So we added some margin so that things do actually line up when there is no clip path support. But now we're getting into a situation where, well, we don't want the margin if there is clip path, but we do want it if there. What do we do? That's okay. We can get back to this. So we just reset the margins inside a feature query using the supports keyword. We say if clip path is supported, then we just want to reset that margin, and if it's not, then we will apply it. It's the supports keyword looks a bit like a media query, and it kind of works in the same way. I wanted to say also here that you don't have to use this. If you're just doing something that is, an avatar with a rounded circle around it or something like that, then you don't need to kind of get into all of this. It's only when you find yourselves in those sort of slightly sticky situations where people are asking for stuff that you're not quite sure if it's this is quite complicated. Then this is when you would break out your supports. If you have some shenanigans and some overriding and resetting to do, then this is the place to use that. And the important thing to note as well, is that we don't have to do this. We just get this fallback. And this can be used as a sort of bold statement, like we've seen in the exciting kind of art direction earlier, or it can be used as a sort of little bit of extra flair around small elements throughout the page. But the one thing that is important to remember is inclusive design patterns. So this is another real-world example from another creative agency, an example in the world, again, responsive. I don't know what they've done here, but it looks really good. So you might have noticed in this example, they've made very sure that their text ends on the right-hand side because it's a left-to-right language. I always have trouble with those. And this is a really important thing to remember. When I was writing this talk, I didn't think of this, and that's why my examples are sometimes the wrong way around. But it's very difficult when you're reading along to go back and pick up the line on the other side. So I would recommend thinking about things like that, like who's reading this, what's the audience, what side do you want to have this kind of art direction on. So the last thing I want to talk to you about is this. This looks kind of dry, and it kind of is. This is the Css Shapes Spec. Does anyone actually even read this stuff? I don't know, maybe for other things than this. But I think it's really important to kind of keep our eyes on this as developers, because this is how the web gets made, right? If we don't do this, then browser developers are not going to, if there's no demand for it, people are not going to implement it. So, okay, don't go and just read specs all the time unless you need some sleep. But follow people like Jen Simmons, follow people like Rachel Andrews, follow people who are kind of doing interesting stuff with this and sharing it with us. They look to us for our feedback. They want to know what we want, what our designers want, what our clients want. What do our imaginations want? And we should let them know so that we keep getting more cool stuff. So it's up to us as developers and designers to share what we want and to share what we find with the browser developers and with our teams and with each other. So I'm really interested to find out, what will you make? Tweet me and tell me and share your shapes. Throw some shapes. Tell me how you get on. Thank you. That's everything.